We have fallen back into the pits with yet another versus matchup. This time we have Gawain versus Nero in Fate Extra, one of the most bogus fights in Extra that I've seen. But there is a lot of angles to this that still make it super interesting, so I'm not gonna count it out completely. If you know, you know. We're gonna be talking about both versions of the fight because I feel like it's necessary. We'll start off with the original. Looking at the scheme of the way that fights go down in Fate Extra, you know, the playing field is Seraph. You have Hakuno doing his exploration, and then by the end of the week, he enters the chamber with said master and they go into an elimination match. And that's how they find out who's gonna progress or not. The big difference between Gawain and all the other people that he had faced is that, well, one, Gawain is the knight of the round. His background alone just screams that he's a superb fighter. So in Gawain's case, and we've been over this before in the Don't Sleeps, Nero can't actually hold a candle to Gawain. Her only chance is her beast or her Venus form, or whoever goes against him for that matter, whether it be Nero, Tamamo, or Emiya. In the position that Gawain held, he was using his numeral of the saint. You know, numeral of the saint is his sun buff, and he gets a power up from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. and then another one from 3 to 6, and then his power triples 3 times as much as it would be usually, and he's already a prime servant without it. So when you run into him in game, you can't even hurt him. You keep trying to find ways to go back. Okay, maybe I can do this. Okay, maybe I can talk to this person. Nothing works. You lose every single time. And that's not the only thing he had. He also had Leo. He also had other skills. So he's getting defense buffs. He's getting the sun buff for power and defense. He's getting code cast from his master Leo, which is just Fate Extra mystic codes to help him along his journey. And he's running through everything that comes in contact with him. So you know what the story does? They nerf him. That's how we beat Gawain in Fate Extra. Nero literally has to nerf him by turning out his power in story. When they called him the Gorilla Man, they were not playing. Whether you go down the path of the Ren route or the Ronnie route, they end up saying, oh yeah, I do know how to shut off the power. And so they shut off his access to the sun, and that's how you end up beating him. He was just that much of a threat. And that was one of my biggest issues and why I led into the video with it being bogus, because it is. There's no way around it. And then you got these kids running around who don't understand the story talking about, well, that's her imperial privilege. Really? You nerf an entire character and that's imperial privilege? Just in case you're lost? That's not how this skill works. It's crazy, man. Like, they really did Gawain so dirty. And as crazier as it might sound, the more I look at it, I'm starting to develop a sense where, just for this fight in particular, I enjoyed the premise of the Encore version more because of the way that it came about. Now, don't get me wrong, it's still BS. Don't get it twisted, but it's a more comfortable BS. You know, it's main character shonen protagonist BS. Something that we all know and we've grown accustomed to. It's not anything out of the usual, so it's not nearly as jarring when it happens. So when I see Hakuno doing these things with his dead face, it doesn't bother me nearly as much as Nero or whoever is the lead at the time finding a way to shut off Gawain's power, which is actually ridiculous. At least the powers of the dead face, while it is a super protagonist EX, you are my friend buff, there's some foundation to it where it's built upon the last Hakuno. You got Gawain, he's already been injured from the prior war, so it's not like he went into that fight with the main character at full capacity. And then you have the fact that in Encore specifically, Gawain has been there waiting for several hundreds of years, and so his sword isn't as polished as it would be normally when he goes against Hakuno the first time around. So if he loses in that condition, weakened, hasn't fought in centuries, I can rock with that outcome. It's actually a justifiable situation, and that's why I really love the traditional fight that they show us in Encore, where you see Nero go up against him while the sun is still intact, and you can really see how she can't move a muscle on Gawain. Gawain ran straight through her. Like, I was rewatching the fight for the video and the dude was giving her the work the entire time. He didn't even need to Excalibur. That's something that Leo wanted. Another thing I really like is Leo coming in with his terrain manipulations and moving the entire playing field around, actually being a real master and being a part of the fight instead of just standing there. Leo comes in for the blind side, Hakuno's blocking with his dead face. You got Nero realizing that her master is in trouble and she's trying to get to him, and then Gawain just gruesomely punches her dead in the chest. Like, you gotta hear the sound effect on this punch. I thought I got hit. I'm like, yo, was that the sternum? Oh my goodness. You can literally see Nero stop in place because it hurt that bad. Like, the man had speed blitzed her. It was like he did a flash step. He got right up on her and punched her dead in her shit. I'm like, see, that's what we had to deal with in Camelot. My goodness, that was one of the most. There is no anti-inflammatory, no Toradol in this world that's gonna help her with this injury. Nothing. It's not gonna work. And then if he wasn't giving her the beats enough, the dude turns around and uses his Excalibur Galantine. She tries to block it and he goes straight through her defenses. Then he comes back around 2 seconds later and hits her with another one, knocks her completely out of the stage. I don't know how they thought taking his stuff away was fair. It reminds me of those people that say, well, this servant wouldn't be good if they didn't have this. Obviously, you dummy. That's what makes them. It's like saying Bruce Lee wouldn't be good without his martial arts. Martial arts is what makes Bruce Lee Bruce Lee. No duh, he wouldn't be good without it. I'll never get these types of people, and I see it so often. And then you have his master, Leo. Now, Leo is in a situation where he's undefeated. He's the reigning champ because he has Gawain at his side. And again, Gawain is one of the strongest knights of the round. Every time somebody would reach Gawain, he would dust them. Gawain serves Leo just like he did King Arthur, in a very steadfast way. His whole thing is that he doesn't want to succumb to the same issues he faced in his past life, right? So he deals with the same inner turmoil as Lancelot, but for different reasons. And now that he's been given a second chance, that being him summoned into the Grail War, he wants to make sure that his master now is properly served the way that a king should be, to make up for his past. And it just so happens that Leo fits that mold. To Gawain, he fits the mold of somebody that embodies that air of a king, but he still has much to learn. So Gawain is going to be the one that stands by his side. He's not going to argue with him. He's not going to dispute over his ideals. He's just going to trust him with his sword, and whatever happens, that's just what it's going to be. Then he found out that Leo has never actually lost a match. So Leo is a person that doesn't know defeat, and given the circumstances that Gawain went through, he already knows, and this is mentioned in his materials, that a person that doesn't know defeat, their idea of ruling is going to be skewed. And he's talking about Artoria. A person that hasn't taken a loss can't set up a realistic life for themselves or the people that's around them. They can only set up this false expectation that eventually is going to lead everybody astray, because everybody is following you. They can operate in a vacuum because the core elements are going to keep staying the same. But if they step outside of their domain, they're going to get swallowed whole, because the world is ever changing. No matter how you feel about the world, it's always going to be ever changing. And that's the difference between the real world and the world of extra, where everything remains the same. And it's all up to who's the one making the top choices. There's an interesting conversation with Ren towards the beginning of the war, where she talks about how things have been the same for the past 20 years. And she herself says that she agrees with the initial ideals of Leo, saying that change is something that promotes problems. And what this really reminded me of was Amakusa Shiro. Now, if you remember, Amakusa's goal was to get the Grail and put all of humanity into stasis. We would no longer have our bodies, everything would always be the same, and therefore there would no longer be any any problems. The world's issues would be solved, which is a good idea in theory. But the problem with that is that's when everybody loses their humanity, because there's no such thing without an actual conflict. So when you think about it, the world of Extra itself is exactly what Shiro Kotomine was trying to make. That ongoing, never-changing experience. Think about it. You come into Extra, everybody's the same, they're like robots. Well, they are NPCs, but you get what I mean. They come to the school, they participate, the world resets. But you have anomalies like Ren and Hakuno, for example, that still exist. They're actual people and not bots, at least on a mental level. So it is very important for Hakuno to interact and break the web and force that humanity upon the world, or rather try to retain what it once was, because without it, we really become alien ourselves. And a lot of people can't live that way anyway because they'll just get bored and participate in evil. The idle mind is a dangerous thing. The world's best and worst things have come from an idle mind. It just came from people being bored. Ren also talks about the fact that without change, there's no way that you can improve. And when I think about it, it's like, yeah, you can improve, but at the same time, why do we improve in the first place? It's because we need to keep going. If there's no reason to improve, then you're just improving for the sake of doing so. If you didn't have to actually improve, people would not be improving. Take a car, for example. If this generation of a car has good brakes, you shouldn't ruin the brakes. If the brakes are already working, why would you ruin the brakes? It's the same reason why Fortune 500 companies like Apple push out the exact same product every year. And then every couple of years, they bring you a new generation to make it feel like you're getting something different. But on a year-to-year basis, they might change 2 or 3 things and give you the exact same phone at a higher price. And it's really because we're simple beings. We just make things complex. That's just what being a person is. Same thing with games, same thing with anything really. How many times have you heard, I'm not gonna buy that. Why would I buy that? They never change anything. And then they be the first ones to make the purchase. First one to make the purchase and the first one to complain about it. And this is basically what Ren is getting around to in the conversation when she says that's why she's completely against Leo's family, the Harways, who want to keep things on this constant hamster wheel. Her goal for being in the war is to break the mold and give humanity a future to look forward to. One that's actually dynamic. And that's why when you think about people like Gawain, Tristan, Bedivere, they're all very stoic in character because that's the way that their king ruled, and so they just follow suit. Of course, you have the game come in and give them their flavor and their banter, but for the most part, they're pretty straightforward knights. It's not like Charlemagne and his paladins at all. And that's why it was so easy for Morgan to manipulate Mordred and use her against Arthur, because she wasn't that. She was the exact opposite. She never really fully adapted that stoic state of mind because that wasn't her priority. It's almost like you're trying to get a puzzle piece that doesn't fit and jam it in. It's never gonna work. And what happens then is that you break the ends because it was never supposed to fit anyway. We can be as simple as doing the same things over and over again, and as complex as wanting to rule the entire world. And that's where I empathize with Leo, because his background is one where a lot of circumstances for him were positions where he couldn't be involved. Like the dude has been a test subject since the age of 3. So for his parents, or rather his father, doing these experiments on him because his father wanted him to be a particular way, he wanted him to be the fitting heir for the Harways, had Leo's mother taken out the picture because he felt that she was useless and didn't want her to derail him. How can you blame Leo for his way of thinking? If you come into the world and it's already like this, and Ren just said it herself, the world has been like this for the past 20 years. The Harways have owned the world of Extra all this time due to Leo's father being the leader of the Western plutocracy. So in Leo's mind, all of this is okay. And how can he think otherwise if he's never seen any different? It's hard to miss something that you didn't have. You might often be struck by positions of, I miss the good old days. And it's like, well, what are the good old days? Because if somebody erases your memory, that doesn't exist. And so it's those core elements of being a person that Leo was never able to experience that would almost make you feel sorry for him. Despite him being in this position of wealth and being at the top of the world and being one of the only people that's conscious of what's going on, he can't even really enjoy it because he doesn't even know what enjoying it means. You know, he functions a lot like an actual king already, or Artoria and her round. And so this setup all comes full circle. It ends up being the perfect parallels that kind of justify his behavior. There's a particular part of their fight where Nero calls him out on the fact that he hasn't lost, and she says there's no way that you're fit for being a king, because when you actually do lose, you'll be devastated because you don't know what that feels like. You don't know how it looks to have your heart ripped out in front of you, and so you'll be in shambles. It's different when you lose and you're at the bottom because you know what both sides feel like. But if you've only been at the top and you lose, then it's more so just confusion. Well, I've never been through that before. It brings him to tears. He's being assailed by all these thoughts, and he's in despair all at the same time. It's just a lot to take on regardless. Again, the humanity has been stripped out of him, specifically because of the role that he plays in the story. And so I find him interesting in the fact that he even entertains the idea of breaking the mold when he's only known this. He's only been taught this for all this time. It's almost like he had to live with the Kirei state of mind, where he's just doing the thing that's logical to him. And just like Kirei, you may feel how you want to about Kirei, but you gotta give the credit that even Kirei, as a psychopath, wanted to evolve beyond that point. It's like there's no way that I'm just like this, that my mental state is I only like this one thing, until he realized that's what it was. And so they're alike in that manner. The very fact that they would go against their own biology makes them far more interesting than most characters, both of them. Because a lot of people, if you tell them to sit down and shut up, they will sit down and shut up, and you'll never hear a word out of them because they're comfortable. They really represent the evolution of humanity altogether. And in a different timeline where they weren't forced to be this way, I'm sure they would be really good people. Now that I think about it, I kind of want to see a timeline where they aren't this way. And I know you might be thinking, well, that's what makes them them. But I'm looking at it more like, what would they do if they were on the opposite side of the spectrum? Would they play the role of Ren and Hakuno, or would they play the role of Shiro and Kiritsugu? Who would that person be? Because even in worlds like Prisma Ilya and Fate Extra, or any side spin-off, Emiya's cooking show, Kirei still believes in what he believes in. He's just in his shop chilling, and he stays to himself with it. You know, looking back, I wouldn't mind an inverse of every character, because I feel like that would make an interesting route in and of itself. If the core of every character was inversed. Now, we get a lot of inverses already, but they're sprinkled throughout different timelines. It's all here and there. It's never all in one place. That could have posed for a really good foundation for the Ilya route, honestly, because it would be like Strange Fate, where it took the core parts of the story and completely turned it on its head, but still kept the main frame of what the majority cares about.